Welcome to yet another episode of Game of Thrones Abridged on Alt-Swift X. Today we are reading Eddard 11. Eddard 11. The 44th chapter in A Game of Thrones. And we begin the chapter with a description of the throne room in the Red Keep in King's Landing. And what a throne room it is. It's described as cavernous. It's a huge space, and the light of sunset is spilling across the floor from through some long windows high above, and there used to be dragon skulls hung up along the walls in this throne room. But Robert Baratheon had them removed when he took over. He thought they were the wrong decor. They were messing with his feng shui. So instead he took down the skulls and he put up a bunch of tapestries of like hunting scenes and stuff. That's apparently Robert Baratheon's extent of his interest in art. He put up some hunting tapestries, which are rather less impressive than the dragon skulls, I'd say, though of course the skulls are a strong symbol of the Targaryen dynasty and their whole deal, which is something that Robert strives to replace with something new and better. He wants to drain the swamp of all those dragon lords and replace it with something better. He kind of fails to do so, I would say, on the whole, but hey, he was better than Mad King Aerys. And of course, the center of the throne room, the elephant in this particular room, is the Iron Throne, which is, in the books, very different to what it looks like in the show. In the show, it's a dinky little, it's cute, it's nice, it's a little symmetrical, little pointy, it's like a little hedgehog, a pointy little happy little hedgehog sitting in the corner. That's what the throne is in the show. In the books, it is a monstrous mountain of twisted steel and iron, and it's ugly, and it's asymmetrical, and it's this huge shadow of spikes, which represents the nature of power. Of course, power is meant to be this dangerous, ugly storm cloud looming in the room, something that can swallow up those who try to claim it. Honestly, I think they should have considered retconning the appearance of the throne room in the show, because they retconned a bunch of other stuff. Like they retconned the Eyrie, because the Eyrie used to look very different in Season 1 compared to Season 3 or 4 when it reappears. Maybe they should have also changed the throne, or at least the throne room. Because the throne itself has become quite iconic as a symbol of Game of Thrones, which is perhaps ironically iconic, given how different it is to how it is in the books, perhaps. But anyway, they're in the throne room, and the throne is huge. And Eddard is sitting in it. So the throne in the books, it's not just a seat. It's like this whole fucking installation that you have to climb up into. It's like meters and meters high, and you have to climb a staircase of iron swords in order to reach the seat part of the throne. Kind of ridiculously large, really. Giant pile of swords, and that's what Eddard has climbed, and he is sitting in it, because of course he is King Robert's Hand of the King, and so he is Robert's surrogate while Robert is off hunting. So Eddard is carrying the king's responsibilities, sitting in the king's seat in lieu of the king himself. And Ned is uncomfortable. Ned is uncomfortable because this seat is deliberately designed to be uncomfortable. Aegon the Conqueror made this seat after his conquest of Westeros, and he took all of the swords of his enemies who knelt to him, and he took their physical actual swords and melted them down in dragonfire to form the massive pile, the throne of the realm he forged. And he made it deliberately uncomfortable because Aegon said that a king should never sit easy. And so every king since, in the centuries following, had to suffer in a very uncomfortable seat made of barbs and sharp edges and nowhere comfortable to put your bum. Which is quite a sacrifice to make for a good metaphor. It's a good metaphor that power is not something you should easily rest easy on. But damn, I mean, some cushions a nice sofa, like a lazy boy, it doesn't have the same majesty, I suppose, but a royal lazy boy might be preferable. So Ned is sitting in the throne room, and he's dealing with a problem. The problem is that a bunch of towns in the Riverlands have been attacked, and people are discussing who the culprits might have been. And a lot of the important people are away at the moment. The King, Lord Renly, Sir Barristan, Prince Joffrey, the Hound, Balon Swan, half the court are all off hunting, because they saw a white hart, which is some kind of deer. A white one, I suppose, is more rare, like a shiny Pokemon. So Robert's hefted off his master balls, and he's off to throw some balls at some Pokemon out in the long grass. I expect that's what's happening. And meanwhile, the dregs of the court remain to deal with the actual problems of the realm and the attacks that are happening on the people of the Riverlands. And so there are three men who are bringing this issue to the Crown's attention. There's Sir Raymond Darry, there's Sir Carol Vance, and there is Sir Mark Piper. And these are all knights from the Riverlands who have been trying to defend their people from these individuals who have attacked the common folk. And Ned describes the political situation in the West as being pretty on edge. Sabers are being rattled in this part of the world right now because Tywin Lannister is gathering his swords around Casterly Rock, and Edmure Tully and Hoster Tully are gathering their swords around River Run, and this is all a consequence of Catelyn Tully kidnapping Tyrion Lannister. So we're seeing some pretty serious consequences of that decision. And it's only a matter of time, Ned thinks, until the blood begins to flow. And along with these three knights, there's a bunch of peasants, a bunch of small folk who have been brought before the king, who are apparently the last survivors of the towns of Wendish Town and the Mummers Ford and a bunch of other these little villages, little hamlets around the Riverlands that have been wiped out by these attackers. And they're a pretty ragged bunch. There's old folk, there's young folk, there's a young girl in a bloody dress staring blankly who seems quite traumatized. Something quite bad has happened in these towns, in the Riverlands. And so they get one of these peasants to describe what happened, and he addresses Eddard and says, "Oh, your grace, blah, blah, blah." Because, and then Ned realizes this bloke thinks that Ned is the king. Of course, he's only the hand of the king, but this peasant, and Ned reflects that, wow, this guy literally lives like a few miles from the capital, a few days' ride from the capital, and yet he has no idea what the king looks like. Which is not only evidence of like the disconnect between like the echelons of power in the capital and the common people who are so disconnected from the political process that they don't even know what the king looks like, but also it shows that Ned himself is a bit out of touch in his own surprise at the fact that this guy doesn't know what the king looks like. So not only is there this huge gap in between the like social strata of this society, but the people at the top to some extent ignorant of it, which is a worry. We have a description of Ned's clothing, and Ned is wearing black and white and grey, he says, all the shadows of truth, which is interesting. Of course, we know that Ned is someone who likes to deal in black and white absolutes, but is also someone who acknowledges the greyness of truths, moral, ethical, and otherwise. Ned is someone who has lived his lives for 14 years. Ned knows what it means to be in the fog of semi-truths. And so the common bloke describes what happened, and he describes his town being attacked. He used to have an ale house, which was supposedly the finest ale south of the Neck. But these raiders, these attackers, they came out of nowhere and they burned the fields and they burned the houses and they killed the people. They weren't here to steal stuff. They didn't take away the livestock. They didn't steal our grain. They just destroyed everything. So they weren't just common thieves. And they mention a big one in particular. There was a big man among these raiders who was especially fearsome. And they attacked and they did terrible things in multiple towns. And Varys reflects on how dreadful and how cruel the treatment of these people is. Varys, who knows much about cruel treatment of people. And Ned sort of shuffles in his seat a bit listening to this, and he reflects some more on how the Iron Throne is full of traps for the unwary. A chair that can kill a man, because one of the Targaryen kings, I think Maegor, supposedly died on this throne. So this, of course, is a metaphor of how power has its traps, and having such power can lead to your own demise if you're not so careful. And Ned is trying to be careful. But Ned thinks that, well, Ned feels out of place up here. He thinks that what he's doing sitting there is something he would never comprehend. So he feels very out of place sitting on the seat of the greatest power in the Seven Kingdoms. Ned never wanted this, just like every other bloody responsibility Ned's ever had. He never asked for this, but he must shoulder the burden. And so basically what's happening is that people are saying that it's the Lannisters. The Lannisters ordered these attacks on the towns of the Riverlands. And Ned's like, well, have you got evidence that it was the Lannisters? Did they wear crimson cloaks, or did they have a banner with a lion on it? And the Knights are like, well, no, they weren't doing those things, because the Lannisters aren't so stupid as to be overt about this. But they were very well armed for a bunch of random people, and the horses that they rode were war horses, not random horses. So, I mean, these guys seem like proper soldiers, not like just random ruffians, yo. And there was about 100 of them or so, different accounts about how many of them there were. But the sort of clinching evidence that demonstrates that this was the Lannisters is the especially large man among the party. The especially large man who was big as an ox with a voice like stone breaking. And Mark Piper says that, well, that's the Mountain. That's Gregor Clegane. No other man is so large and recognizable. And everyone in the room draws breath when they hear this accusation, because Gregor Clegane is, of course, a bannerman of Tywin Lannister. So it has very significant political consequences if one of Tywin's boys, one of Tywin's mad dogs, is out attacking random peasants in the Riverlands. This could mean war. And so a lot of the sort of lickspittles and busybodies try to sort of diffuse the situation. Pycelle rises ponderously. Pycelle does everything ponderously, meaning slowly, and sort of like an elephant. An elderly elephant is ponderous. Pycelle does everything ponderously in this book. He has ponderous breakfasts. He takes ponderous shits. He ponderously goes about his ponderous life. He even probably ponders preponderously, I would say. He's a ponderous man. But they're like, oh, well, maybe it wasn't the Mountain. Maybe it wasn't the Lannisters. They're trying to sort of diffuse the situation. But the reality is that everyone sort of agrees that, yeah, the Lannisters have been killing innocent people in the Riverlands. Shit. Which is politically inconvenient, given that the Lannisters are, of course, the family of the Queen. And a lot of people start to leave the court at that point. And Ned reflects, well, are those people just sort of going to sort of retreat and sort of lay low, or are they going off to sort of nibble the Queen's cheese? I'm not sure if that's a euphemism, but I think what they're suggesting is that these people might be going to inform the Queen that the Lannisters are being accused of killing innocent people in the throne room. And Ned notices Sansa sitting in the audience, which angers him because he thinks it's no place for a girl to be hearing about these serious political matters. And so they talk about where the knights were when all this was happening. So Edmure Tully seems to be running shit in the Riverlands at the moment. And he's been trying to sort of gather his men to defend against the Lannisters. And Ned thinks that Tywin is manipulating Edmure Tully by trying to force him to spread out his men across all the Riverlands instead of gathering them into one strong force. And Edmure suggested that these knights go and hunt down Gregor Clegane and take him to justice for the murder of the peasantry. But old Lord Hostertully, Edmure's father, cautioned him against doing that without getting the Crown's permission first, and so that's why they came to King's Landing to discuss this issue. And Ned reflects that, yeah, this does make sense. Tywin sent Gregor to attack the Riverlands as revenge against Tyrion's kidnap, but he made them look like normal brigands instead of soldiers as a way of making it look like it wasn't his fault and it wasn't his provocation, so that when the Riverlands attack the Lannisters, then Tywin can say, well, they started it. So classic grade school fight tactics being used in this medieval warfare. And Pycelle reflects on how implausible it is that an anointed knight like Gregor, who had said the vows to protect the people, would do something so horrific. Pycelle is such a complete Lannister ass-kisser. And they're saying, look, the king's justice needs to be enacted to take Gregor and Tywin to account for their crimes, is basically the conclusion here. And Ned gives a little speech about how, all right, we're going to bring justice. Justice, it can't bring back the murdered people or rebuild your broken towns, but we can get justice by holding Gregor Clegane to account. And then Ned talks a bit about how he talks about his culture of the First Men. The First Men believed that the people, that the man who calls for death should also swing the sword. The judge should also be the executioner, Ned says, which must be queer for these Southerners to hear this Northerner talking about his fruity cultural beliefs and imposing them on their political system. But whatever. So he reckons that that as the judge, he'd like to go and hold Gregor to account himself, but alas, he can't. So he decides that he's going to have to send someone else to go after Gregor Clegane. And Loras offers to go after Gregor Clegane because he's so gallant and brave. But instead he sends a party including Lord Beric Dondarrion, Thoros of Myr, and a bunch of other knights, and a bunch of his own guards. This is another example of Ned sending his own guards off on some important business, which is all well and good, but it weakens his own position, importantly. And so that's the group that he sends off to get Gregor. And of course this group eventually forms the core of the Brotherhood Without Banners, led by Beric and Thoros. After Beric dies all those times and so on. But the upshot of all this is that Ned is sending blokes out to get Gregor Clegane, and Gregor says he will bring the knight's justice to the knight Gregor Clegane. And Ned denounces Gregor and attaints him, strips him of his ranks and titles, his lands and incomes and holdings, and sentences him to death. Which, when you think about it, seems a bit hasty, right? I mean, the only evidence that Gregor Clegane did anything wrong are the accounts of these common people saying that there was an especially large man among the bandits, which is like, okay, I mean, that does seem a strong hint that Gregor is responsible, but are you really going to sentence a man to death on the basis of that alone? That doesn't seem like strong enough evidence, but I suppose welcome to Westeros. No one's got time for a lengthy political process. You just go with whatever you got to go on, which of course is the same sort of attitude that Catelyn had in arresting Tyrion. These sorts of hasty decisions might be born out of necessity, but they certainly cause a lot of bloody problems. Perhaps in those two examples that's got a lot to do with the whole sort of Starkian attitude of having no tolerance for wrongdoing, just getting in there and solving shit right away. That sort of black and white thinking could probably benefit from some more greys, as Ned was talking about before. But anyway, so Ned dismounts the throne after making that pronouncement, and the men are sent off to go kill Gregor. And then Varys and Pycelle at the end of the stairs, or Varys at the end of the stairs, is going, "Whoa, that was a pretty balls-out move, Ned." And Ned's like, "Well, you gotta fucking do what you gotta do." And they'll also talk little bit about not sending Loras out on the mission. And they also talk about Ilan Payne not being sent on the mission. Ilan Payne, the mute executioner, was not sent on this mission. And Varys thinks, well, executions are normally Ilan's speciality. You're depriving him of a speciality, of his life's work. And Varys says that Ilan was glaring at us while you were making that pronouncement. Ilan was staring at us with those pale eyes of his. Ilan, the executioner, he does so love his work. And that's how the chapter ends. So, Ilan, I think, obviously here is a symbol of death and doom, right? Just like Ned was talking about, all this ominous talk about how the Iron Throne has swallowed those who have sat on it, and people have died on this throne, and how power is dangerous. Ned is in this position of power, and he's not feeling very safe there. He's doling out death sentences to people, but it might be that Ned's own death is the one that is approaching. This situation is dangerous, and the grey pale eyes of death are glaring at his chest. So shit's getting pretty real. War is starting in the west. Tyrion's running around out in the Vale, and Sansa, meanwhile, is watching all of these proceedings with wide open, not well understanding eyes. Although we will see more from her soon enough. So that was a chapter that had some pages. It had some words, and I hope that you enjoyed it. And we will have another episode for you soon enough. Cheers.